All right, there we go.
Okay, 6:31, I'm calling the meeting of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We're gonna have to roll call.
Yep, we'll do roll calls. So we have Val,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. And you should note that we're missing 2 board members.
Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful to do introductions so that for the recording,
Recording.
know who's
Okay.
where
All
and
right.
how.
Okay, let's do introductions, starting with Paige.
Yes, hi, Paige Alberg, staff at Ramsey-Washington. Do you want me to say that I'm remote, Tina? Or
You could, yeah.
That's good,
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm remote.
Brad,
Brad Lindeman, District Engineer, Bar Engineering. I'm remote.
Nicole,
Hi, Nicole Soderholm from staff, joining remote.
Bill,
Bill Bartolje, Natural Resources Specialist with the Watershed. I'm remote.
okay. Pam, I guess we have Pam already, so Kyle,
Oh, she should introduce herself
Okay,
too,
sorry.
yeah.
Pam,
I'm Pam Skinner, manager, and I'm remote.
good. And Kyle,
Hi, Kyle Kubitsa, District Water Quality Technician, and I'm remote.
Dave,
Can you hear me okay?
Yep,
Dave Lawson, project coordinator. I'm remote.
okay, Chad,
Yes, hi, Chad Ayers, Sampatech, listening on behalf of the 748 Bielenberg project.
okay. Are you going to make a presentation or just listen?
Just listen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, Tracy.
Hi, Tracy Gallowitz, attorney.
Okay, roll is taken.
Oh, and us too, we should do us.
For us, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Larry Swope, Watershed President, and I'm here.
Val Iso, board member, and I'm present.
And-
Board.
Thank you. And Tina Carson's administrator of the Watershed District. I'm also in the boardroom.
Okay, good.
Got it.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there any, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I will move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Val,
Aye.
Pam.
Aye.
And Larry.
Larry, can I interrupt you for the meeting for a second?
Sure.
I'm sorry, my dogs are going crazy behind me. I just want to point out that as somebody who works in infectious diseases, we have decided at where I work that when we get together in small rooms, we wear masks again. Honey, will you control the dogs for me, please? I'm just suggesting that you might, and we might at the Watershed District, when we get together in small enclosed spaces with more than 2 people, put masks on until this new variant thing rolls over. I'm saying this early now because I see you 3 without masks and it's concerning to me, but you do what you want. It's you. I just want to bring that up and think we might want to consider that as a policy.
Okay, so noted. Okay, so we're on visitor comments.
Visitor comments. Yep.
The house.
Mhm.
No visitors here that are going to make comments, so we'll move on to item number 5, the permit program.
Larry, can I interrupt just for a quick second too and let Chad know that his permit was approved during the consent agenda
Oh, thank you.
and there was no discussion. So if you're free to stay, listen in, Chad, otherwise you're free to go as well.
Is that Tina?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Nicole.
Yep. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Okay. Permit program. We are now on item B, 5B, which is the residential shoreline permit pilot program.
Yeah, so last year at this time, the board, excuse me, approved a pilot program for some residential permit implementation that differs slightly from kind of a normal grading permit process. I outlined, just as a reminder, what that implementation and those changed procedures are for residential shoreline permits. And I wanted to bring some data back to the board about how it's been going. So I've listed the residential shoreline permits that have been approved since August of last year, and would like, the board's feedback on what you think of this program based on what you've heard, and I can certainly answer questions that you may have, to either permanently adopt these implementation procedures, or if you feel more comfortable extending a pilot effort if you'd like to see more data gathered. So I summarized here, where the permits are located, whether or not they were staff or board approved. As a reminder, any variance requested from our rules would require board approval. I've listed the floodplain fill and compensatory storage volumes. Those are all in cubic yards. And then I also touched on, there haven't been any unforeseen wetland impacts. There have been 0 erosion control violations, and then status of the permits that have been issued. So I've also listed some trends and observations. I don't know if you got a chance to review. I don't necessarily need to read through it, but be happy to take any questions or comments.
I think it was very well done. It looks like the feedback you got on it was positive. I think it was what we expected to be accomplished. The only thing I would say, and this is not about the program, but since there are only 3 of us here, my feeling is I would like to extend this to next month's meeting, so the other 2 board members hopefully can be here, and we can go through it as a group to make sure that they're in agreement before we make a change. I personally don't think we need to go for another year gathering data, but I would rather that Cliff and Diane were here to review this with you and give their feedback.
Okay.
I would ask, how would the budget proposal change if this was included next year? Would there be any change?
No, there wouldn't.
No.
No change in the budget. It's just staff time. So it would be continuing to be staff time. Well, it's staff and engineering, but we budget for that just fine for, we have enough wiggle room in there for these few that come in. So I don't anticipate there being any changes.
And Larry, would you like to hold discussion until the whole board's here? I just had some other questions, but I can wait.
You can ask the questions if you want. I don't think there's a problem with that at all. It may actually give the other board members something to go on. But since the board was pretty actively involved with this, it's just kind of with a scaled down group. I think it'd be better if they were here.
For decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you have questions, you can ask.
Well, there's also, changing the permit amounts and those sort of things, which are pretty serious board things that they ought to be involved in.
I was just curious, having not been a part of the creation, did it meet the expectations and amount of participation?
Yeah, in previous memos, when the board adopted the pilot program, I kind of listed out desired outcomes, and there, I didn't repeat that in this memo, but I touched on all of those. I went back to that memo, and that's sort of directed which data that I was providing. But I don't really see any negative impact as a result of this program. I either had positive or no feedback. And And I think that particularly with our monthly permit deadlines for projects of such short duration and small square footage, I think that it's been a benefit for homeowners to be able to implement these projects quickly or sooner than they could had they had to wait, another 2, 3, 4 weeks for the board to approve, particularly when there's no variances requested. So,
I mean, I personally love the idea. I just been trying to get my arms around, like, is there a point in
yeah.
time where the staff would approve and then they would feel it necessary to bring it back up to a board besides the variance requested, or is it only when a variance is requested would be the time that the board would see it?
It's if a variance requested, if there's any impacts proposed to wetlands, and the variance typically would be that they're not to decide and rule on a project that, essentially reduces net floodplain storage on the lake. So another big part of this implementation and what drove this program was our website. It's very geared towards engineers for filling out the permits. There wasn't a lot of simplistic terms and ways for residents to wrap their head around this process and our rules. So we actually developed a separate permit page with our communication staff with frequently asked questions, and then a separate application form that's pared down a little bit. And we also thought that the $500 application fee could be cost prohibitive, especially for small projects. And it doesn't take as much bar time, for instance, to review the average shoreline project. So we wanted to be more reflective of the time that staff and our engineers were spending. So those are kind of some of the things that triggered some of these changes, if that helps at all.
Yeah, I think the program is a good one, and when we get to that point, I'll vote to implement it. Are you going to, on a monthly basis, so tell us what permits you've approved that we don't have to bother with?
Yeah, I actually have been over the past year including that information in the enforcement report. So there's a section for staff approved permits, and I list those there. If you'd rather more or less information on the enforcement report, I can provide that.
It hasn't stood out to me, but that seems appropriate.
Yep, that's fine.
Pam
Okay,
has her hand up as well.
okay, Pam?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm also favorable and fully supportive, and I just want to make sure that by us delaying for a month to get input from the other two managers, that it won't impact your program at all.
Yeah, I guess technically if you wanted to direct staff to continue with this implementation for the next month, and then, with that process being that you'll revisit it in September. I think technically a year ago, we said that it would, an action would be taken a year from then, which is now. So
I will move that. I will move that we just do it exactly what Nicole just said, and if that's good enough for a motion.
Mhm.
Second?
I didn't understand the motion.
So I believe the motion is to extend, direct staff to continue on as is over the next month when it will be
Second.
revisited again.
Second.
Okay, we'll have a discussion on that. So here's my discussion. If we do that, does the permit fee still stay at $500? So
no, if you direct staff to continue as is, we would be looking at residential shoreline permits the same way we've been over the last 12 months, which is a $175 application fee.
all right. Okay, roll call. Or did you have a comment?
May I just ask if there's, if there's 3 of us on the board today, or you want the discussion of everybody here, and that's why, okay, I'm good.
No, we can pass it if we want to.
No, I like,
Yeah,
that's the hard part is, I think others would be in favor for it. So if it's worth just passing it now, I apologize, I didn't bring it up earlier.
Well, okay, my only thought, and we can do that, that's not a problem, but the only thought process on, because they were involved in this thing all along for quite a while. And, you know, Nicole's done a great job with this. It's a big change. It eliminates bureaucracy. I'd like them to be somehow involved in it at the other meeting. That's the only point.
I can get by that.
Sorry.
Ready for roll call?
Roll call.
All right, Val.
Aye.
Pam
I,
and Larry.
Aye. One thing, roll call takes a lot less time than it
With
did
three people.
before, I have to say. Okay, that brings us to item 6, stewardship grant program application 2126 CS. Page.
Yes, I'm sorry, there's a lawnmower right outside my window right now. But yeah, so this one, it's a standard, you know, buffer restoration around this pond in Roseville. And I mentioned in there, so they're requesting, at my recommendation, they're requesting a little bit more than what is kind of our standard for habitat restorations. And that was because we worked with them, we kind of encourage them to expand their area and then also plant more emergent vegetation and use more plug plants, so larger plants in that planting zone, and that raised the cost a little bit more. You know, another option would be that they would phase it, and then that would probably in the end be more for the district than this amount. So that's why we're recommending that 15,406 versus the standard 15,000.
Okay,
do we need a motion to approve that, or can we just say, go ahead?
We'll need a motion.
I move that we approve that.
any further discussion? Roll call.
Val.
Aye.
Pam
I,
and Larry.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to item number 7. The Keller Channel Weir and Phelan Outlet Modifications Change Order number 5.
All right, I'll pass it right to Brad for this discussion.
All right, thanks, Tina. Hopefully it was clear in the information that I provided. It was a series of correspondence between bar staff and the contractor and even the subcontractor that is actually making the claim through the general contractor. You know, what happened was there were a couple of wires that were left off from the electrical portion of the two controls for the 2 Phelan outlet structures. The subcontractor identified that you know, during the construction or installation, had to make a connection between those two. That was not something that is common to BAR's electrical engineers that originally laid this out. So that, you know, it wasn't as if we forgot it. It just wasn't something that we had seen as necessarily being necessary. But the electrical contractor, I think, convinced, and Dave, you can chime in here too, convinced us that it really needs to happen. It really needs for this work to come together to add that. So if you saw the details of, you know, kind of what they're asking for, it's a significant amount of wire. So it generated this cost of north of 30, I think it was about 3,600 or thereabouts, but it's in that change order. If you go back, and this is what we do with change orders, we compare that to the specifications and how things deal with it. A lot of times you'll see change orders for extra work that we actually ask the contractor for. Now, this wouldn't be considered extra work. This is work that we would consider as incidental or something that's needed to make the work come together. And that's laid out in the specifications as, you know, the contractors should, you know, thoroughly look over this and include that in their bid. And if they're not going to include in their bid, they should identify that prior to making a bid, just so we can make that clarification on the plan. So while I feel the contractor was genuine in saying, hey, you missed this, wasn't laid out on the plans. We didn't find it until we actually got into this further past the time we went ahead and installed it, thinking that we would just get paid for it. And they did it in good faith, but I didn't provide the recommendation in the change order because of the clear language that was laid out there in the correspondence that said, basically, this is a piece that makes the work come together. So I did tell the contractor that, and basically said, even though I'm not recommending it, you can still essentially make your case to the board and see if they believe it's still the right thing to do to go ahead and pay you, or if they want to, basically go right to the letter of the contract the way it was laid out, which would deny the claim, basically say that this should have been included in your bid. So that's what's really before you tonight. But it comes without an engineer's recommendation because of the language that's laid out in the change order correspondence. Is
I
that
move we
clear?
approve the change order.
Okay.
And by approve, Pam, you mean pay them the additional money they're asking for?
Yeah, I mean, Brad just said they didn't catch it. It seems reasonable. They did a good job. I'm all for it. I move we approve the change order and pay them the additional amount.
Okay, second,
When do we have discussions on it?
right after you say second.
Seconded.
Okay, discussion.
What would have been the outcome if they didn't do what they did?
My understanding, and I'm not an electrical engineer, so I probably will not do a very good job of explaining this, but because of the connection between the two gate systems, they wouldn't be able to talk to each other quite as well. Again, I think they made a case for, we believe this is necessary. It's not extra work, but it's just something that should have been. So the east and the west controllers could talk to each other better. I can find out more about that, but again, without having an electrical engineering background, I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that. But
what I'm trying to understand is if it was additional above and beyond what was absolutely necessary, because I think that would change my opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
From what I recall out there is they ran the original stuff to spec and they wanted to hook everything up. In control people were out there working on it and things weren't working quite as right. They were getting a couple of alarms and then they realized as they're looking at it, they like, oh, it's like we missed a ground wire type of thing. It's kind of working, but it would work better if this wire was on there. So they had to pull everything back out, basically to redo everything minus the conduit.
So I guess in direct answer to your question, Val, they could have gotten it to work. So when you use the term absolutely necessary, I don't believe that is the case, but as Dave was explaining, and hopefully you caught a lot of that, basically it will make it work a lot better. Because of the alarms going off on the different ones because it wasn't talking to each other. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that definitely is.
And we told them to go ahead and do it, right?
Dave, that's correct, right?
Yeah, man, that's fine.
That is correct. They made a case that says you should really have this wire.
Okay.
Yeah, what wasn't clear in the correspondence back and forth was I couldn't tell who was the one who okayed the work, and so it was you, Dave and Brad.
Yeah,
it would have been Greg and myself that was kind of going through there and then kind of talking with Brad and then, like, hey, we're saying, okay, we got to bring it to the board. It's not a guaranteed thing. You're going to get your money, but we would speak in favor of the recommendation. And well, here we are today.
And I interpreted owner as the general contractor over the subcontract, but it's
There's
us.
us,
That's us, yeah, we're the owner.
Yeah, so I basically agree with Pam that we ought to go ahead and pay them for this, because I think they did it in good faith to make the system proper, and I think Dave did the right thing by okaying it, by moving it ahead. So we don't want to get into with our contractors. They won't do things for us anymore.
Well, and just to be clear, I don't disagree with that, that opinion by any means. It's just when I review this with the language that's in the specifications, I pulled out those pieces that say, well, it's kind of tough for me to recommend something that's, seems different than this, but there are cases when, as this contractor has made, where it might make sense anyway.
I'll just confirm that. I mean, certainly the contract documents support what Brad's saying, but the facts of this case make it pretty simple to decide as Pam recommended, because they did act in good faith to maybe improve the system.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Okay, Val.
Aye.
Pam
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Okay, moving on to 7B.
That's me. So this is Tina. I'm got the budget for 2022 discussion. In August, we typically start to see some numbers. So you'll see that there's a budget table there for 2022 that shows the comparison to this year's current budget. Along with that budget table is the line item breakdown. So for some of those budget table items that include a number of projects or programs or studies, I wanted to break those out for you so you could get an idea of what's included in those. And then there's a line by line narrative, and that doesn't change a whole lot year to year. I do put the numbers in, but it just does give you, especially for the general fund, because there's so many lines, gives you some idea of what's included in those line items. I also included in the memo some discussion around the targeted retrofit projects and some of the work that the staff does to identify which projects we might pursue in a certain year. So that information is included in here as well. And I included at the very end, I included the tool, that prioritization tool that I just mentioned, the memo, which is the final memo that was discussed by the board last fall or winter, early winter timeframe. And that's for your information and just as supporting documentation for how staff uses that information as we look to the following year. As Brad mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're, this time frame, there's still changes and there's a lot of work going on. I even say that in the memo too, especially around targeted retrofits as we're meeting with landowners. And so that those numbers and those projects are in flux all the time up until the point where you would see them for approval to move forward. There's a lot of discussions going on. So in fact, many of those projects, we may have heard from the city, for instance, that they're not doing a street project this year. So they're going to push it out another year, which means our project won't happen. So those things will continue to happen and we'll just update you as the months go on with that information. I guess I'm open to however you would like to have this discussion. If you want to just jump to questions or if there's something in particular that you would like me to address or discuss. I did just want to make a note, as I say in the memo as well, that right now it shows an increased levy. This is very common that I would show that at this point in time.
Right.
We really refine the carryover as we go out throughout the year. And if the board were to say we want to target 0% or we want to target a certain percentage, there's no problem with doing that. That can happen as we're refining. I don't see at this point any reason why we couldn't get it down to a 0% levy with the amount of carryover that we have available to us.
Do we have any limit on our ability to raise the levy?
There's no limits on raising
for
the
us?
levy.
Because I know in Maud, some of the watershed districts do have limits.
Yeah, we don't have a limit because of our metro status, and
Okay.
that's based on tax capacity, which is very high, you know, for us
Right,
in
yeah,
the
okay.
metro area,
Okay.
like the outstate does.
I had a couple of questions on the notes or like sheets on line 41 in our program 41. Just curious, you only had a contingency of $5,000, which seems a little low compared to a lot of the others.
Yeah, I think typically, and Bill, if you have anything you want to add to that, Larry was just commenting that the contingency we show for NR is only 5,000. Bill typically has his budget honed in fairly close, you know, it's not, we don't typically need a lot of contingency in NR, but Bill, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with that. We really haven't run into any issues in the past, Larry, with that number.
Okay.
So we have a really good understanding of what it costs for maintenance and to conduct a substantial restoration project each year. So these numbers are really solid.
Okay, great. Another question I had was on line 44, Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. How much did we end up giving them last year? Do you remember?
So last year we gave 25 plus 25, so we did 50 total.
50.
Yep.
What was that for? Just curious again.
So the Minnesota Research Council is a statewide collaborative that's put together by the University of Minnesota and Extension and St. Anthony Lab. So that it's a group across the state that pools money together and then gives out grants for research work to be done.
Okay.
So it's a collaborative where Bill sits as a watershed representative on the council and reviews the submittals that come in. And then I just received from the head of the council today, and I'll send that out to all of you. It's the year in review and information so that you can see the projects that were funded with your funds last year.
With your dollars, yeah.
Mhm.
Because I know it's a good program. That's why we talked about upping it. Part of the reason why we upped it was because at that point, it looked like everybody was cutting back on their budgets and they were doing such important work. And Cliff's been a champion of this from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think, so we
Before the
upped our
beginning, yeah.
contribution to it. Challenge other watershed districts to do the same. I don't know if they did or not.
There were a few that gave that hadn't given in the past. I think in a smaller amount and 5,000, 10,000 kind of increments, but didn't spur the same kind of, but yeah, certainly if you're interested in continuing to give at that 50,000, we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, personally, I would think that would make sense, but I would also, that would be one of the things as we go through the process. Hopefully Cliff gets back. He can weigh in on that too.
Yeah, Larry, it's really money well spent, and the ability to pool our resources to pull off some of these research projects, they just wouldn't happen otherwise. So
yeah,
it's a really valid contribution.
We've been fortunate to be able to be on partners on some of these projects as well. So, they'll do some work on ponds in our district or, use our subjects as research. So that's been a nice way that we can contribute as well.
Yeah, I would think, even though we characterized it and it was a special assessment, but I think I'd sort of like to see that again next year.
Yep. If there's no.
What made it unique that last year was 50,000 versus the proposed?
The fact that at the time we were doing that, well, actually it was after the budget, we poured more money into it. Everybody was cutting their budget. They work on donations basically. And particularly the state was cutting back, and they had such important programs that they were going to have to bail out of someone if somebody didn't step up and help. So Cliff and I were, I don't even remember, it was a live meeting or something. We're on there, and it made the plea for other watersheds to step up. And as an example, if we're asking somebody else to pay more, we decided we would pay more too.
Like that.
Yep. Yes, Pam.
Yeah, thanks. So Tina, thank you for including the table, which shows, of course, what the increase and decrease is, and for those who've been on the board for a long time or the staff, I really care about, I'm concerned about paying attention to that, the percent increase or decrease. It's never been a decrease since I've been on the board, as far as I remember, but the percent increase in our proposed levy, and to be cautious and careful and concerning of people who, especially during this COVID time, might be really struggling financially. And oftentimes in our board packet, we get, and I would like to request that we get again, is actually saying a document, Tina, you might remember, of the value of a house and how much our levy is on that value of house. And it goes up from whatever your $100,000 house to your $1 million house. And we can see that really helps me, because I'm very concerned about the people, particularly old people living on Social Security, trying to stay in their homes. Like I used to mention, like my grandmother and her peers, and now it would be my mother and her peers. And when we raise our levy, this could really impact them. And I like to having that table to see, like, okay, they're going to pay $50 and now they're going to pay $60. To us, that might not seem like anything, but to somebody who's living on Social Security, it might. And so I'm requesting, one, that you do provide that information to us annually, and maybe again, next time we talk about this, to have it as part of the discussion. And I think I am going to assume, from seeing this for a zillion years, that 5% is not going to impact much, and it's all fine. But I just want to throw that into the conversation for us to, just to have some concern and evaluate whether what we're doing might negatively impact people who are impoverished and trying to stay in their homes.
Yes, thanks.
Especially during this time of COVID.
Yeah, I always include that in the September discussion. That's when we have our public hearing, where we can take and solicit public comments as well. So I'll have that in there, as well as other breakdowns and charts, and looking at our tax levy and budget over time. And as well as how the money is allocated to meeting our goals. So you can see that breakdown as well. Thanks for that comment.
Pam, curious question. In Washington County, do they break out the watershed on your tax bill?
I believe that we come out as something in a line item called other. And we're included in other, and we might be the only other, but that's what I recall.
Yeah, I was just curious, because in Ramsey County, we're under other too. It's us in the public library.
But is mosquito control district separate?
Yeah,
I think mosquito control district might be it too. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but good point. We had this discussion last year that our goal should be 0 if we can do it, but we have to trade off, what we need to get done, and be cognizant of its effect on people.
And I was going to ask on that September meeting, because it's going to be a more public forum for the proposal. Is the intent what we see here, what's going to move forward to that, or is the intent that we set a percentage and then try to shoot for that before September?
So I think what I would normally do is make any changes, adjustments that are discussed today, like for the Research Council, and I'll increase that to 50. I'll continue to look at our budget for this year to see if carryovers can be adjusted to which would change the levy percentage. Oftentimes we go into that September meeting with a very similar proposed levy increase as is shown here, but I always caveat and always make sure that I mention that at every meeting, that we can continue to refine that. And if the board's direction is to go 0, I probably wouldn't do that until we get to the December meeting, so that I can better refine that. It's also, while it's not against the rules to increase your levy between your September and December meeting, it's not looked at very wisely. So they often will say, if you're going to start with a little bit higher levy, you can decrease for your December final levy, but you shouldn't. It doesn't look good to increase it between, especially for us, because we're not required to do truth and taxation. September is really our public opportunity for comment. on the budget. Obviously, we have visitor presentation opportunities. They could come in at any meeting to do that, but we don't hold truth in taxation like other entities do.
I didn't have any questions. I think there was like the focus, so it looks like a little increase in the education and communication, which I think is going to be really important.
The communication part, I presume since we're changing to another vendor, we're going to and I know everything I'm talking about is going up instead of down, but is $50,000 enough? Does Lauren think that's enough to be able to get all that accomplished?
Yeah, because some of that money will be spent this year yet. We have budget
Okay.
available to us in
Okay.
2021. So really for what we need in 2022, that should be sufficient.
Okay.
There were a couple other little things like I liked in the status at the bottom of the packet where they were talking about some outreach things, the forward technology. Would that be covered as a line item or covered in like a general fund somewhere? If we were to decide to like promote and do something similar just in our neck of the woods.
For the outreach of,
Let me pull it up, it's at
Yeah.
the bottom. I really kind of enjoyed how it ended on it. So let's see.
oh, in the project status report.
Yeah, it was. There's just what is the discretionary funding for little programs that promote community outreach is kind of the question.
Yeah, because a lot of that is staff time, you know, it's built into our salary. You know, we don't need a lot of program dollars for that, but there's, I think in our,
There's a new technology review section.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're talking
Yeah.
about like how they educate people around, and it just was great. I followed some of the links.
Yep.
I didn't know how to attribute that to a specific budget item. So
So education does have a contingency of 15,000. And we also have room, you know, typically in our education budget at the end of the year. So I don't think it would prohibit us from
doing something like that.
pursuing anything else. Yeah.
Since we are sort of talking about budget, there's a lot of money left in the stewardship grant program.
Yeah, yep. Paige and I talked about that a few weeks ago. Paige, are you available to touch on that? There she is.
Yes, sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I noticed, and I apologize that I should have asked this back in the stewardship grant program and forgot, but now that we're talking about budgets, there's a lot of money left in the stewardship grant program this year. Is that indicative of what's going to happen going forward, or is that
Yeah.
something going on?
Yeah, I don't know, Larry. I think a lot of it, you know, in the past, we have a lot of projects that have been approved this year, but there are a lot of smaller projects. We don't have a lot of big city projects that have come in. You know, that has in the past that has taken a big chunk of the funds, and I guess I haven't heard what cities have planned. I haven't either way, you know, if they are moving forward with any big things or not. But next year, you know, we'd like to do a Lake Owasso focused shoreline restoration like we've done on Snail and Twin. So that'll take a big chunk. Yeah, so I don't know to answer your question.
My take is that the cities just have focused on the essentials over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, you're still seeing a high number of residential permits, but they're small compared to when a city comes in with a big project. So
Yeah.
whether or not that will be different next year, I don't know, but Paige will be working with them over the next several months to kind of identify anything that may come up in those.
Okay, I was just curious when I was thinking about next
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, we did talk about, because that fund used to be 800,000, we bumped it up to $1 million. So Paige and I did talk about whether or not we should bump that back down to 800 or keep it at $1 million. So
Okay.
for now, it's shown at $1 million, but again, a lot of that will be carryover if it continues to be
Right, yeah,
quiet years, so.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay,
One thing I'll mention, because that's a significant increase in the flood risk reduction fund for this year. Again, a lot of carryover. but the budget itself is a significant increase. You'll see things in there like the Owasso Basin flood risk reduction projects. Those are, the pond and the berm, those were identified, discussed. We're pursuing those projects as we move forward. And then there's a placeholder for Coleman Creek storage and detention. Coleman Creek feasibility study is in progress right now and will continue to be worked on throughout this fall. So we wanted to have some funds available to pursue projects out of there, some of those like low-hanging fruits like we did with Owasso Basin. You won't see Ames Lake area or Willow Creek area highlighted in this budget table for funds. Willow Creek and Bragg, you can add if we need to, but with Willow Creek, we don't have any significant projects that we're going to be pursuing. We're looking at emergency response plans. There's just a couple of businesses and homes that are left in the floodplain after our survey information. So that's small things that might come out of there, but nothing large. And then Ames Lake does have a lot of large projects potentially coming out of that feasibility study. That's also still in progress. But many of them are identified as city-led projects, which brings just a different timetable for how those might be pursued. We might still take the lead on some of those projects for the city, but it's going to take more significant coordination with them to pursue those. So we don't anticipate there being anything big in 2022, but we also have this contingency, healthy contingency in this fund as well. So we just know that these projects are high priced and high impact on the project. So we want to be available, have those things available. So as we continue the program and the identify projects, we can start pursuing them.
When we get done with like Ames Lake and that, are you going to review with the board the difference between the Beltline resiliency study and what you found?
Yeah, I mean, yes, for sure. So that'll be part of you'll get the presentation on the feasibility study and the recommendations that come out of there. And that, yes, it will show the difference between the Beltline resiliency study, remember, was real big picture, and then these were to dig into the details. So anything else to add to that, Brad?
I think you're exactly right, Tina. With the resiliency study, it was very conceptual, high level. We worked through the feasibility study, we get a little more detail, we can refine things. And then this survey, a good example, when we went through the Willow Creek feasibility study, we had some larger projects identified, but then we went out and surveyed and we could refine that. And a number of the homes that looked like on LiDAR that were actually in the flood zone by quite a ways were either just barely touching, the water was just barely touching at the 100-year level, or they were removed from the flood level. So you can see the benefit of doing these surveys and getting really the specific data in the field to really refine things. And that's what we're working on right now with the Coleman Creek sub-watershed feasibility study in particular, as now we've got all that data and we can refine that and come back in the next month or so to start to share just what these projects might look like. So the placeholder comes out of the resiliency study with respect to budgetary dollars, but that very likely will be refined as we move into the fall.
Yeah. Good. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was sorry, on the give me a second. Pull up. So for the 22, do we have any other earmarked planned feasibility studies outside of the two aforementioned Coleman and Ames? And if so, it wasn't clear to me. Is that fully captured in this feasibility study section? And those are the ones that are planned. Do they normally always get planned the year prior, or do they come up during? I'm just trying to ask to understand.
Yeah, I would say for project feasibility studies, we typically can plan ahead for the next year, but there are always things that pop up where we say we should be looking at this now and ask the board to move forward with that. There's contingency. So,
yeah, it's like the contingency gives you room for a project or two small projects effectively.
which I think has typically been fine. And some of these other projects might not move forward either. We might decide to not move forward with some of the other planning studies. You'll see the flood risk reduction feasibility continued work. So that's if there's any carryover into next year. And then at the bottom, there's the Owasso Basin North Star Estates feasibility. So that's taking kind of a closer look at North Star Estates specifically. And that's continued work as well, because that's something that's happening this year.
Yeah, I thought I had read a little on the Owasso Basin report. But,
Yep.
okay. I just wanted to
So we have reached out to the city of Little Canada to organize a meeting to start talking about that, hopefully in August, depending on their availability. So we want to keep that moving. Similar to, the surveys that were done in other parts of the district, eventually we will get to that point. Right now, we are focused on, with the manufactured homes in North Star Estates, just where are we protecting to? Is it basically the skirt around the mobile home? Is it the utilities? Is it truly the first floor, which tends to sit about 36 inches on average above the ground? And so that makes a big difference when you look at that whole community where there's right now identified 90 to 100 homes in the North Star Estates that are within the flood zone as we see it now. So it's an important discussion going forward, and definitely the city has to be involved with that. So we're working on that right now.
I mean, that's definitely a soft spot for me with some families. And so when you're doing that, it would be nice to, maybe set some sort of precedent. So as we approach these other mobile families, we get mobile homes or manufactured homes, I should say. The manufactured homes, we can actually approach them with, here's what we've seen and that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited about that particular one.
And FEMA does have some guidance on manufactured homes. You can follow that, but the cities may be more, I would use the term stringent, basically providing more freeboard. Again, the utilities are underneath, but they're really totally exposed, except for the skirting around those things. So, and that's why we really want to work through that with the city, and again, try to balance what we do in that community with something that's very comparable on a home outside of, North Star Estates, whether it's a small home in Maplewood or a much larger home someplace else. We want to be very comparable in that flood protection approach, and it's not clearly laid out in our rules how we would protect those manufactured homes at this point. So.
And the reason I wanted to ask this series of questions is I'm not really familiar with is 400 enough for these types of studies. And so if we feel like these are the comprehensive set, the 22, and I'd assume it's probably going to increase over time, especially given some recent historical things. I just wanted to make sure that feels robust enough so we can address things as they come up. That's all.
I mean, I believe there's enough in here to keep going. Again, we'll get some of that done this year, which wouldn't impact this dollar amount. As Tina mentioned, there's probably some of these other ones that we've got a budget line on them, but we haven't seen a lot of activity, and that would be like the Hillcrest Golf Course. We wanted to keep that budget dollar there in the event that picks up again. But it hasn't had much activity this year. So that being all part of that 410 that's shown in the feasibility study number, I think there's some flexibility to move around if one needs to move faster and get bigger than the other ones. And again, this is just the study portion. It wouldn't be the actual capital improvement when we get to that point, which, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, could come out of the flood damage reduction fund.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. On the examples you provided about the water quality projects, it's sort of interesting that most of them ended up in a tie, more or less, using the tool. Do you have tie-breaking criteria to determine which one comes to the top? Because the one that looks like in the top here is one that is kind of complicated to do with all the people involved and
The Beaver Lake streets, yeah. I would say that it's not like we start at number one and go to number two. It's we send out feelers to these top 10, you know,
Okay,
and say, Paige knows or staff know, maybe they've had discussions with a city staff member and they know that South Lake Judy bioretention for Lake Emily is a high potential. So then, you know, it's right there in that mix. So then that one rises to the top because we have a connection and we're ready to move forward with that. And we believe, you know, of these, I don't know, Paige, how many projects are in that prioritization tool where we pulled these top 15 from?
A lot. I
Yeah.
think now we're at over 100.
Over 100. So that's how we use that. We don't necessarily say, well, this is the most, even though, like you said, Beaver Lake Living Streets, but again, that's really dependent on when the city is ready to move forward with their street project. And now I think we're hearing right away, I can tell you, right, that they're not ready to move forward with that.
Right. And that would have been my response too, that probably the tiebreaker is the timing. Because many of these don't want to go on the schedule that we'd like them to go on, you know, and it's a cooperative thing. So you have to match up with the timing of the other participants.
given that, what do we actually use the prioritization tool for?
To see these projects that come to the top. We want to make sure, right? So if we came to you with a project and it scored a 2, you know, let's say.
So someplace there's a bummer list.
Yeah, yeah, we keep all
See.
those projects on the list because that can change over time too. Let's say it's in a sub-watershed that's not impaired right now, and then in the future it is, or vice versa, it's in a sub-watershed that gets off the impaired list. So those can change over time. So it's not like we reject them completely. It's just that they are not as, we don't feel they're as high a priority right now based on that tool. So, and I would say that in the past we did this internally kind of in our minds, right? We said, oh, this project would be a priority. Oh, we have an interested partner, you know, let's pursue this. But now at least we have more justification, I think, to show that, yes, this does meet goals of our watershed and is not something that we're just doing just because it's an opportunity. It actually will meet a goal for us as well.
It does, is there any, so on the Beaver Lake Streets one, how did that conversation go? Was it we presented, here's the benefit to committing to this type of program and why it needs to be cooperative and how it's over? I'm just trying to figure out in an instance where it's so wholly aligned to our particular goals, like what happened?
Yeah, Paige, this is a Maplewood project, right? Correct?
I think this one is technically St. Paul. So we reached out to them just, I mean, kind of loosely to ask when this is on their schedule. And it's not, and I can't remember when, it's not anytime soon where it's on their schedule, but they know it's a priority area for us and that we've identified it. So they would come to us when they're ready. You know, usually they have a 5-year plan where they know these are on their schedule. Yeah, so.
Yeah, the cities are interesting too, because they might make a push for a neighborhood knowing that they might have a project partner like this that would work with them on that. You know, for the Living Street stuff, I was thinking it was Maplewood, but I think you're right, it is St. Paul. But like Maplewood has a Living Streets policy. We've done a project with them in the past. So it's just a matter of finding the neighborhood and having that connection. But
In that particular instance, would you revise how it ranked in terms of like the community importance if the city wasn't, like after you've reached out, would it change how you rank the programs actually quantitatively?
Yeah, we'd have to look at the rating to see if it got, or I have to look at what the scoring is for, because I know there's willing partner is a,
Yeah, it's
which
weighted.
Yeah.
but it's
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think I would disqualify this one at this point. I mean, we've had some where definitely that, like if it's a private owner and they say, no, we're not interested, or, you know, I think that might lower it down, but St. Paul is willing. It's just a matter of timing.
So I wouldn't necessarily change it on our spreadsheet so that it stays.
Is there, on the spreadsheet itself, is there, help me understand whether you guys would think a new criteria with timing would be important just to help summarize it all together. It seems like a lot of them are helped out because of, oh, this is a convenient time for the two to partner. Is that a criteria that is, in y'all's perspective, maybe missing from the spreadsheet or important as part of that spreadsheet?
I guess we could look at that. In my head, I factor that in as part of the willing partner, but maybe that's a bad assumption, or maybe the points would change if we change that criteria. I don't know, it's all new sort of, so we're definitely open to changes.
Yeah, I think we could look at that and see. I still kind of look at it as a second step in that, you know, after. But I think we should look at how that's worded and how we look at that for.
I think it's a nice completing of the picture in
Yeah.
my head. So even if, you know, it's the second step, and the third is you go back and add it and say, okay, this justifies it because it's not. Because I love the move to quantification. I did have a question on the tool, as I wasn't part of the board prior. Was the tool, can you help me understand the process for approval of the prioritization scheme and how the board played a role?
Right, so we provided the memo and got feedback from the board. And it was more of a, I would say, approval of the process for staff.
Okay.
I mean, that was our goal, was to use this as a staff tool. But then also I know the board's interested in seeing, you know, like this information that shows how it might fit into the prioritization and scheme of things as you're approving projects. So as you see projects come forward, we can do some comparison and some information around how it's scored and why it was pursued as a project.
So it's a iterative, evolving prioritization tool that you're still taking feedback on, and will be a
Always
living one.
It's definitely a living document, something that we are working in behind the scenes as the years go on. Yep.
And then in the section with the flood part and I know you and I talked on the phone briefly on this. I was trying to get a sense that section's used to primarily rank feasibility based outputs, or is this ranked, what's the scope of this is the same tool for flooding and quality? Is that a correct statement?
I will say yes and no. I think we can put the flood control projects in here.
I mean, it looks like they're weighted very favorably to flooding now that I, have fully grasped the picture.
And that's why we needed to separate, because we know that water quality is different than flood control, and it has different levels of need and support. So it gets a little confusing because in the water quality projects, we also determine if there's flood control benefit, right? And so we have that in there. And also for flood control, then we have water quality in there, because there's also can be water quality benefits to flood control. So we are putting them in that, but I would say that prioritization happens a little differently. Like when the board saw the Owasso Basin and we said, here's the projects we want to move forward with. That happened a little differently, I would say, than like this process would happen.
And are there, because my line of questioning comes, are there other programs here or another weighting required that says to really enable this project for flooding, we need to invest in this particular project for water quality because of its impact on flooding? I'm curious, is there a relationship between some of those approved flooding projects and these particular ones that I just haven't been able to figure out?
I guess I would ask Brad. I mean, so we do always evaluate, right, the multiple benefits of a project. Mm-hmm. And I would say if we had a project that had strong support for both flooding and water quality, that would really be a good project for us to pursue. Or
like an enabling project, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think if you look into when we evaluated all of the projects which combined, the water quality and the flood control, you'll see a project like what we have proposed over on the west portion of the Owasso Basin area with the pond and the the drainage work that's happening west of Owasso Basin to help Owasso Basin. That scored super high. In fact, it may have been the top scorer because it did have the combined water quality benefit. It's primarily flood control, but it also has a strong water quality benefit that will help because that then will drain directly to Jarvis Creek. So they are interrelated. And I mean, I suppose we could pull apart the scoring criteria to show how you can essentially manipulate that in your project to make it score higher. But they are interrelated in that way. If you have combined benefit of flood control and water quality, it will score very high in this evaluation tool.
I'm just trying to test my mental model, having just kind of digested it and how those two are things would relate.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into the spreadsheet further, and maybe you could look at it and maybe ask specific questions on how those things work together and why we chose the scoring that we did to have that. But I don't have enough.
I trust y'all's scoring. I just wanted to make sure that I get a good sense on does it agree with the priorities in my head is kind of honestly all I was trying to dig at. So y'all score the way you need to score it. If it just doesn't, if the projects bubble up and there's not agreement for them, that's kind of what I'm just trying to figure out in my mind.
Right.
Yeah, and I think as we bring forward like that pond project and some of the other flood control projects, we can include that information as well from the tool so that you can see how that looks.
Yeah, it was great, which
comparatively, yeah,
generates the question.
Yeah.
What is next?
Yeah, any other questions about the budget or?
I'm good. Pam, are you okay?
I'm good.
Thank you.
So the only significant change I see was in the research council, so I will increase that budget, and then like I said, I'll refine the table and we'll get that public notice. I'll work with Tracy in her office to get that public noticed for the September meeting for the public hearing.
Okay. All right.
Sounds good, Tina. Thanks.
Thank you.
We published that in the St. Paul Pioneer Press.
Yep, so our newspaper record is the Pioneer Press. Yep, that's correct.
Just out of curiosity, is it a well-attended meeting?
Not typically. We might get a couple different residents. I don't know that we've had anybody speak on the budget itself for a couple of years.
No.
But they might be here to listen, because I'll do a presentation on the budget for the public and
we'll have dual way to look into, so they'll have more people.
Yeah.
Did we get a new person? There's a phone number.
Yes, I don't know. Somebody just joined with a phone number. If you wanted to identify yourself so we can have you on record for the meeting minutes. And you'll have to unmute. I muted you. It's a mystery. So is somebody here with a 612-328 number? If you want, I can remove them or we can just let it be.
Not going to identify themselves. I think we're going to move them.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Okay, so on to item number 8, which are board policies and issues. We continue to talk about maintenance and maintenance standards. Looking at the reason for putting this on again is to kind of continue that dialogue on a board basis as to how we may want to more formalize the maintenance processes that we have. Like we had recently, we had issues where citizens were looking at the depth gauges or the elevation gauges, sorry, on the lakes, and they were moving. We had to report it. So kind of like, do we have a punch list of things like that we go through? Or what sort of process should we have for formalizing our maintenance so that we can point to exactly what we're, if somebody asks a question, point exactly, this is how we do it, this is how our punch list is.
And I know this was something that I have also been curious about, because what I was seeing, or at least when I've looked around on the website and had conversations, what I think I've seen is we're missing a means to communicate kind of why something was maintained, how it is going to be maintained, really informing both our stakeholders, being constituents, but also like our internal selves, and educating others. And so I also was suggesting that, to address what I think I'm seeing is how do we build a centralized set of or set of guidances to kind of outline these maintenance practices, including the lake monitoring, which I know people have been really excited about seeing. I know some of my neighbors are, but also like the BMP maintenance, what's required versus what's not. And I think through how much of the system is ours versus how much is not ours. And I know Dave calls people when there's problems like the railroads and the others. If we had some sort of set of guidance, some sort of baseline measure that we can kind of put together and say, look, this is how it's impacting the overall conveyance system. I think that would be very helpful. Y'all already moving somewhat there with Carrie's coloring schemes when they do the inspections and some of the other things, but how do we centralize it and write down, oh, this thing is impacting this particular BMP in a way that we can both internalize it and communicate it out to help address questions from constituents, but also those other party members who own part of the conveyance system. That's kind of at least my take on things as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good feedback, and Bill and Brad and Dave, if you want to jump in here too, but I was telling Val that, a lot of that is, we have those, they just maybe aren't written out for education for other entities. And I like what Val is saying about, if we have these other systems that are impacting ours, and we see a need that, we should have a way to communicate that desired outcome, maybe a little more in a formal manner. So I could see there being a guidebook or guidelines for that. Some of that can be pulled right from others, like the MS4 permits, other things that the cities and counties are already, held to for standards, but can go above and beyond that.
And in preparation for the talk, I read through a couple of those permits, and although digestible, it takes a good amount of time to really glean what happens. And so,
yeah,
you look at, I think I was talking to someone and they said, that pipe doesn't work. And I look at it, and I had the fortune of Dave explaining, oh, actually, I think it will work because it's not full up. And so it begged the question of, is there a way to communicate blockage that people understand? And what we look at as occlusion vessels. You're not going to do maybe it's not occlusion, but maybe there's something there that says, yes, this is what it was designed to do, and make it more of a way to help us understand those mechanisms that drive maintenance.
And that'll be good too. You're planning on having that conference with our other governmental partners sometime in the fall, I guess, and you've included some of that in the budget. So what Val is talking about, at least if we can get a start on it, I think would help with that too.
Yeah, I think what we're really talking about here is just having it in writing and in a digestible manner, because we have those conversations with our cities on the yearly basis already with that public works forum. So I think having something, I think they'll like that as well. I think they'll like having something that they can point to. I think what you were just saying, so maybe they even could use that as a tool to convince their councils or their constituents that it's necessary work to be done. Is that, Brad, do you have any questions or comments about that, or Dave? Or
Well, I'm just kind of thinking through the comments, and I'm trying to come up with maybe an example just to confirm. I know where you're headed, Val and Larry. Something that comes to mind is, the system that runs from Grass Lake through the railroad berm, through Rice Street into West Vadnais. One might be looking at parts of that system and see, a partial plugging of the inlet or something like that. And we may, intuitively, we know that where the controlling pipe is for that system is not there. So we might be able to communicate, these are the critical points in particular microsystems that, they can be half filled with debris and they're still passing plenty of flow through. It's not that, is that kind of where you're headed with some of these things, or in communicating where the critical points are in our system, or how? I'm a little bit confused, as you can tell.
To a constituent, like another one I had asked, somebody had asked me a question of how many cattails is enough cattails to do something? Okay, what do you visually look at? And that was another example. Another is, I remember a railroad for one of the inspections that we walked on where the water was clearly flowing under them, which is a big, like, that's not what it's supposed to do in a conveyance system. And so, so things that are, I know you guys know in your minds and have written down in some places, given years of experience and whatnot. How do we set that baseline? Because it's like when you set that baseline, you can actually improve on it, refine it, quantify it, and keep moving forward. I don't know. That's at least, so I think you're on the right track is what I'm trying to say, Brad.
Okay.
Sorry.
yeah, it's kind of getting out of your brains and Dave's brains when you're looking at a system and you say, well, we don't need to have it maintained at this point. Well, why? What would be the breaking point for when we would, maintain something or not? And that, we can look at those as categories for sediment or vegetation or, BMP maintenance. It's maybe a little different, but I think there's different ways we can set that up.
And again, a lot of these are contained in particular areas, because what might be accurate in an area that has a very relatively flat profile to a channel. Back to your example, Val, where you said how many cattails is too many where we would do something. If that were in a steeper section of a channel or a creek in another area of the district, it's a much different answer than a very flat system. So want to kind of consolidate this to certain geographic areas of the district and how that topography looks.
And at work, I think of them in buckets. So what we end up doing, because we're a heavily regulated industry, is we actually bucket the types of programs to adhere to the level of compliance required during the submission. And then so in my head, I don't think I need examples and rules, or I'm asking for examples and rules for every single type of condition. If you cover that 80% and bucketize things, really, I think that would be a great starting point. And it would promote additional, transparency and help establish that baseline, and we can adjust as we can see forward. But that's at least why it was a passion point for me.
Sure. So I think, Tina, one of the first things we would do is try to scope this out. What are the elements that would go into this to try to get a better handle and get our ideas down on paper, and then have that as something you could react to, and then when you think it's ready, pass it on to the board for their reaction as well.
Yeah, I think that would be good to scope it out like that.
Okay.
Make sure we're on the right track.
Would we be able to start that process or get feedback at the next meeting then, so we can put it on the agenda again?
I think so, yes. I only pause because September comes pretty quickly. But we'll get something started, yes, and I think we should have at least a draft scope or something that I can put in front of Tina and see if that we're on the right track in her mind.
Okay.
And then possibly get it in the board packet next month, so.
At least a status. Update.
Yeah, I'll tentatively say, yeah, commit to that.
Well, let's
So,
put it on the
best I can.
where we are at least. I
Yeah, framework.
understand it's sort of an awkward thing.
Yeah.
This is like one of the latest you can have a meeting, and our next
Yeah,
meeting is on
it's early.
September the 1st. Man,
Yeah.
Right.
but you know, maybe we can start to scope where you're gonna go and what you're gonna do. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, good. That moves us on to the administrator's report. Item 9,
Yeah, there's not a lot in here.
because the administrator wasn't here.
I wasn't here much in July. So you see my meetings attended was real light, but I had a wonderful vacation and
Yeah, good for you.
should have included some photos in here for you, but we do have some upcoming things, just the September board meeting, like you just mentioned, is September 1st. And then we had discussed doing the wetlands workshop on September 15th. So I'm still moving forward with that. As well as the rest of the meetings. You'll see I did change the December board meeting, as was indicated at the last meeting, to move it to December 8th. Ongoing updates, as I said, not a lot of movement on those this month, but we will continue on, and I will add the maintenance standards discussion in here as well for you to see next month. And then Debbie's retirement. So
Yeah, we're gonna have an event for her, or?
yeah, we'll have to see. I'm not sure what kind of event that we will see how
Have something.
everything's looking COVID wise, but we do still, you know, to kind of address what Pam had said, I was telling Larry when he arrived here tonight that I am reviewing the changes in the masking guidelines. And, you know, I typically will look at what the state, what the CDC, what the counties and cities in our area are doing, and just make sure we're in line with that. And as you mentioned, many of them are moving to masks indoors again. And so I'll be kind of finalizing that policy and sending that out to the board and staff probably before the end of this week for sure. So that will be happening. And then we are at this point, we had said we would open to the public again on September 7th, which is the day after Labor Day. So we'll look at that. I think we can probably still do that. That really doesn't change our operation all that much. We don't get a lot of visitors. And then if we do have that mask mandate, we'll have that on our door for our visitors as well.
Tina?
Yeah.
I would just hedge caution on just with this new variant and how infectious it is. And even with now with the new data coming out that people who are vaccinated can transmit.
Yeah.
I would just caution maybe postponing a month and absolutely require masks would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Pam. I will definitely send you some communication about that this week for sure. So we'll try and have some sort of celebration for Debbie, and if not now, at a later date, she'll still be around.
We can find her,
Yeah.
yes.
We can find her in her travels, but
Okay, and you started the process to find a replacement.
we've been reviewing the job, making changes to the job description, and we'll be advertising that very soon.
Okay, all right, good. Yeah, well, good for her.
Mhm.
Okay, the next item is the attorney report.
I really don't have a lot to report. We're working with Tina, Pam, just as you mentioned, to make sure we're meeting all the open meeting laws and the public meeting laws, which are ever changing and ever interpreted differently as things progress. So we're working with Tina to make sure that we're meeting all the rules that are required of us as a municipality. We had an ongoing claim on that Target issue with the cars that got damaged in the Target parking lot, but that has been tendered to our insurance carrier, and that continues to be happening. And then the only other thing I just want to say in light of our dear manager's experience this week is we all know to appreciate friends and family. I just want to note to appreciate the professional relationships that we have and what an honor it is to know you all and to work with you. And that continue to keep Cliff in our prayers as he moves forward.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Tracy.
Yeah.
Okay, project and program status. Does anybody have any questions besides me?
I'm excited about the feasibility studies.
Yeah. I had a couple of questions. On the Grass Lake berm, where do we stand with that now? Exactly what are we going to do? I think I've asked this question before and I'm still confused.
You talking about the wetland replacement?
Yes.
Okay, Dave, do you want to update, or Brad? One of you two can go into it. Or
Dave,
As
you
far
wanna-
as I know, as far as I know, I believe we're still waiting on signatures from Ramsey County Parks to let us get in there and do what we need to do to assess it and then move forward. We can't, but maybe I'm incorrect and not the most updated on it.
yeah, that is not true. We do have the agreements for that.
Yeah, the council, it's okay, 2
Yeah.
weeks ago.
Yeah, the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it requires some small monitoring, wells, piezometers to make sure we, monitor the hydrology of the area, make sure it has water, to, maintain that wetland area. And we have to, watch that mature and maintain it, if there are portions that are not growing, if, the vegetation types are not developing like they should, we need to add to it. But basically you have to do that for a series of years, just to confirm that the mitigation that you had planned, fully establishes like you said it would in the beginning. So we're just starting that process now. And this is right, very close to the Grass Lake overflow where it flows over the path
Right.
on the downstream side of that. Is that helpful, Larry? Is that?
It is. It is. Has anybody been?
And I think part of the wetland workshop will probably move into that portion of the regulation discussion where we talk about, okay, when you do impact a wetland, if you fill it and you're approved for mitigation, what comes along with that? I would guess that might be part of the discussions of that wetland workshop.
Okay, yeah, that would be interesting. Has anybody been out there lately? I was looking, there's a culvert that's appeared in Grass Lake.
Because water's low, we see culverts now.
It's sort of like with Deliverance where the hand comes up, culvert out there.
Where specifically?
It's
Right there at the
kind of,
overflow?
if you stand where the new dual culverts are and you look toward 694,
Mhm.
it's like out in the lake, which is not a lake, but out in the wetlands
Mhm.
someplace. Looks like somebody put culverts in and tried to drain it at some point or move the water.
Well, if
Is that
you're, if you're walking by there, if you wouldn't mind taking a few pictures and sending those our way, that'd be great. So, sorry, Dave.
Oh, I was gonna say, that's not the original 15-inch corrugated metal one that's finally visible underneath there, is it?
I think it is. That sounds like about the right size.
Yeah, and that's just probably about 15, I don't know, 15 feet away from those dual culverts that we did on the
That's it.
east, I guess, of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that would be the original one, and instead of taking that one out when we put the dual ones, it's like, well, let's leave that in because it's just an extra 15 inches of pipe that we can drain Grass Lake.
It's not that one. It's not that one. It's one that's you've got the old culverts, you got the two new culverts, and then you got this one out there someplace. It's different.
I'll have to, it's been, I probably haven't been out there for probably about a month, so I'll have to get out there and take a look, see at it.
Well, because it's going down pretty fast and
Yeah.
things are appearing.
Yeah.
Take the kids biking through there. I'll keep an eye
Yeah,
out.
we might
Yeah.
find Jimmy Hop.
But yeah, by all means, send a picture.
Yeah.
Larry, I'll just add that me and a representative from the state agency, Bowser, are scheduled to visit that site next week to look at the mitigation as well. So.
Okay, okay, good. Good, thank you. And what's happening with the monitors? I know we're having to replace some and do we have an integration page yet on the website?
Are you talking about the lake level stations?
Yeah, lake level, sorry.
We don't have a one page. They're all placed on their individual lake pages right now. And we have some, I just got an update from Kyle. Kyle's here. If you want to speak to Kyle, the some of the information we talked about today, but we had some issues because water levels were low and the sensors weren't reaching the water levels. So we had to extend some piping for that. We were also waiting on the West Vadnais one for some back ordered products that we've been waiting on for quite some time. And then Twin Lake popped up the other day with a weird reading. And so we're kind of continually just fine tuning.
Sorting it out. Yeah.
Sorting those out and just determining what's going on. So I know that as far as the full page with all of the lake levels, that should be coming this fall as Lauren works with our new website designer.
Does the bottom of the lake level monitors set at the historic low lake level or someplace else?
So there's, I don't know, Dave or Kyle.
So, yeah, some of it has to do with when the install we did, those bubblers can only really push under so much water. So you set them at, about 3-ish feet for the equipment that we have. Thinking if you can get the bubble line, 2.5, 3 feet underwater, you're usually pretty good and they can stay out there and they won't get frozen in. Water levels have gone down 2+ feet in some of these areas when we put them in originally. And we just need to extend the lines 20, 30 feet sections just to get them out farther in the lake. If we would have put them out farther, then we would have tried to get in 4 feet of water. And I'm not tall enough to bend down in 4 feet of water without scuba gear to get it on the anchor. So that's another reason they only go in about 2.5, 3 feet of water.
Is that going to change or shift how, now that the automatic monitors are in, is that going to change or elevate the amount of maintenance required for that if there is a lot of fluctuation in the next few years?
Not necessarily. I don't think. We can always raise them or maybe get better compressors. The issue comes in, I think, let's see, what Snail Lake, for example, they can only push bubbles so far. So once you start getting about 150 feet, that technology starts to not work as well as it should without maybe going to something a little bit bigger and more robust than what we have right now.
And my last question on with spurious things, have we considered doing some sort of smoothing just to because in this particular instance, a big spur like on Snail Lake doesn't tell me anything. There's no way it jumped 2
So
feet.
That's frozen time though.
That was during the winter.
Yeah.
And so we have a note right now that basically just says you can't take these readings. But we did talk when we met with bar staff with Chris and Jen about taking out some of that data so it doesn't skew the graph, the over time graph, so that you can see it in its true form. So there is, and like for Twin, which you have up there, right, is if we think there's some inconsistencies because of equipment, then we should take those values out
Yeah,
because those
I
aren't
mean,
accurate.
Yeah, and then mark them as incorrect or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep. Or we'll have a gap maybe, or we can smooth out
We
or
could do
correlate
that.
to.
There's lots of different options.
Yeah. Yeah, we do plan to do that though, clean that data up.
Yeah, I'm just happy to see it on the website. to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Yeah, it is fun.
Mhm.
We should talk about how to remove some of the other outdated things at some point, but
So those will also be happening this fall as we work with our website. We won't remove, but we'll update those water quality graphs so that they have the most up-to-date information. Yep.
On the Tanner's Lake Elm facility, which I see sporadically came back and now is back out of order again.
Yep.
You're going to be meeting, Brad, with the MPCA. Do they have an opinion on alum treatment?
I don't know if they have a specific opinion other than I think they recognize it as a very effective method that is been used for quite some time. I don't know if they have a specific opinion as to whether they believe there's new data out to point to its increased toxicity or anything like that. I'm not sure. I can ask Meg and others at BAR that work directly with the PCA to see if there's any new information that's coming out. Is that what you were referring to, Larry?
Yeah, it looked like an opportunity to engage with them
Yeah.
when we get to the alum thing. Pam?
I would encourage any interaction with PCA or anybody with regard to alum and our innovative system to supply them with the research article that summarizes the potential health effects with them so they can become aware, because they're likely not aware.
Thanks, Pam.
And then on Bill's report, I love the terminology of a meander for assessing what's out there. It's sort of interesting. I take it this is something that's been a process that's been validated. Have we used it anywhere else?
Yeah, we haven't used it, but we're partnering with Dr. Sue Gladowich, who developed that methodology, and it's published. So it's an accepted survey method that we're using.
Okay, yeah, sounded like fun.
I wrote down that I wanted to qualify, like, to compliment the protocol, and it's clear, here's the outcome that you're looking for, here's the measure that you're looking for. And I like.
Yeah, thanks. We're excited. I think we're gonna generate some really useful data and get that information out and share it. It'll be a nice contribution.
Good. That was all I had. Anybody else have anything on?
I was curious on the education programs I mentioned a little earlier around. I really love the way that some of those 4 that were picked engaged in their communities in these ways, and was curious if there was anything from a staff perspective y'all gleaned from those projects that you might want to bring forward for this particular board.
So I, after Matt included this in the new technology review, I did send it to Sage and Paige and Lauren, and we'll meet on that to talk about what we could take from this.
Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, that was interesting. Okay, anything else, Pam? Do you have any questions?
Nope, thanks.
Okay. Check. Make sure. Which brings us to item number 12, manager's comments in next month's meeting. We have a couple of things for next month's meeting, but manager comments, Val?
I don't have any addition.
Okay, Pam?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Larry? I'm good.
Good. So I have the budget obviously will come back next month,
Right.
as well as the maintenance. We'll give you an update on the maintenance standards, as well as the other ongoing items that I discussed, in the past.
Okay, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
That's all. We're done. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we did it.
Yeah.
Was this strange?
Yeah, how was it from your end?
It
Did
was
you-
strange. Yeah.
It worked well. It worked well. From my perspective, seeing you, I can see you and hear you just fine. Still concerned about your not wearing masks, but other than that, I think it went great. Thank you, Tina, for making that happen.